Welcome to The World in Social. I'm Chris Rieger with your look at the week in social media news, thanks to our podcast partner, Social News Desk, powering social media for over 1,500 newsrooms on 5 continents. Find out more at socialnewsdesk.com. Coming up in this edition, Facebook rolls out stories to more countries. High-profile Twitter accounts hacked with Nazi slogans. McDonald's apologises over mysterious anti-Trump tweet. Professor Robert Kelly talks about that moment his kids crashed his BBC interview. Jake Challenor from radiotoday.com.au joins me to look at the social scorecard, radio's top-performing posts. And later in the podcast, my special guest, Glenn Daniel, breakfast newsreader for Sydney's Smooth FM 95.3. We'll get his thoughts on how social media has changed news gathering over the last decade. But first, is Facebook trying to kill off Snapchat? It would certainly appear that way as it rolls out Facebook stories to more countries. The feature appears above newsfeed on the mobile app, and just like Snapchat and Instagram, pictures and video disappear after 24 hours. TechCrunch reported it was first tested among users in Ireland in January. It has now been rolled out to users in other parts of the world, including Chile, Vietnam and Greece. Twitter user @HarryQuick commented, Snapchat stories, Instagram stories and now Facebook stories. Why not stick a GoPro to your head and live stream your entire life? FFS. I guess the idea is to have everything in the one app. A number of high-profile Twitter accounts were hacked this week with Nazi slogans. Tweets were sent out from the accounts along with a video of the Turkish president making a speech. Accounts affected by the hack ranged from the European Parliament to UNICEF. Media outlets Forbes magazine, BBC North America and Reuters Japan were also hit. According to CNET.com, the hack exploited Twitter Counter, a third-party tool used to measure Twitter stats. Meantime, it was only up for 20 minutes, but it was enough time to do some damage, yet received plenty of McLove. A tweet apparently having a dig at US President Donald Trump from the McDonald's corporate account. It read, "At the real Donald Trump. You are actually a disgusting excuse of a president, and we would love to have at Barack Obama back. Also, you have tiny hands." At the time one user grabbed a screenshot, it had received over 900 retweets and gained over 1,000 likes. A statement from McDonald's today reads, "Based on our investigation, we have determined that our Twitter account was hacked by an external source. We took swift action to secure it, and we apologise this tweet was sent through our corporate McDonald's account." While McDonald's went into damage control, the reaction online was hilarious, with comments like, "Hire the external source. Shame, I was about to go and buy a Big Mac." Retired PE teacher Carol Elvin's Instagram photos have been shared with over 2.5 million followers. She's been named as one of Tourism Australia's unsung heroes of social media. She doesn't have any formal training as a photographer, just a knack for capturing the city and surrounds in ways that really resonate with her followers. Carol calls them simple snaps. You can check out the story and some of her photos on our Facebook page. Adidas is stepping up its efforts to sell more gear to women through social media. Bloomberg reports it's seeking to double its share of the female sporting goods market by 2020. The company's put together a team of 25 influencers, including retired former tennis number one Anna Ivanovic, and also includes models, DJs, authors and personal trainers to reach shoppers also sought after by competitors. A Nestlé Cereals UK commercial has been doing the rounds on social media. At first watch, it looks like a normal TV ad for breakfast cereal. Nothing to be seen here, move along. But it's driving people nuts. They've taken to social media to vent their frustration at the fact the cereal is added to the bowl after the milk. Who does that, has been the reaction online. Whether it was intentional or not, it's caused a bit of a stir. The social media outcry even prompted a response from the company. In a statement, Nestlé say, "We didn't mean for the advert to confuse our consumers. We recognise that people like their favourite cereal in different ways, and it's delicious whatever order you put the milk and cereal in." If you're looking for a gift for the person who has everything, this one's a bit cute. Soshi, the robot dog. It fits in the palm of your hand and gives you notifications from social media and apps. It's been designed by renowned animatronics creators at John Nolan Studio in London. They've worked with Harry Potter, Pirates of the Caribbean and more. Soci uses Bluetooth technology and an app for your phone to give you programmable functions that you can sync with Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, or any other app that has push notifications. Currently a Kickstarter project, it's hoped Soci will go into mass production soon. For $169, you don't have to feed it, and it won't poop on your expensive rug. Professor Robert Kelly returned to BBC News this week to talk about that moment his two children interrupted his live TV interview. The video has been seen by hundreds of millions. Professor Kelly, an expert on South Korea, was joined by his wife, Jung Kim, and children Marion and James.
Skype has a picture-in-picture, so I was actually able to see as soon as Yana walked in the door. I was actually cued to it, and so I was just hoping that my wife would eventually see it and maybe find some way to sort of run them out of the room. I tried to sort of, if you notice in the video, I tried to sort of move my daughter behind the chair. It's because we keep books and toys for the children in this room. This is my home office. And I was hoping that maybe my daughter might sit down and read a book or something, even for 30 seconds until we could just cut the interview. Right. But once my son came in the little roller, then it was sort of, then there was nothing I could do. I was just hoping you guys might cut it on your end, and I was just sort of maintaining a straight face, hoping to get through it.
The audio thanks to the BBC. Radio Today is Australia's leading website for radio news. Just recently, the site started publishing the Radio Social Scorecard, looking at the top posts from the week. After a couple of busy weeks, I've finally managed to pin down Jake Challinor, who will join me each week for a chat about how our radio stations are utilising social media. Jake, welcome to The World in Social.
Good to finally make it.
Nice to have you here. Now, it seems that our radio stations are finally stepping away from posting those overused memes and doing a lot more original and unique content, which is definitely the way to go.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, they're still bringing a lot of their on-air content online, and there's nothing wrong with that, but they're definitely pushing the boundaries and, I guess, creating social-first content, a lot of video content, particularly around their shows for social, which is really good to see. And they're also embracing live social a lot more as well, and obviously radio is such a live medium, and I think listeners expect to see that transcend to the digital space, and they're starting to do that now really well, some better than others, but it's definitely good to see.
And I've noticed some of them are also experimenting with new platforms. I think Nova tend to use Instagram a lot more, rather than just sticking with the old Facebook.
Yeah, absolutely. They're experimenting. And then you've got individual talent who obviously gravitate to certain platforms as well. For example, Em Rusciano spends a lot of time on Facebook versus, say, Jackie O down the road, who loves Instagram and also experiments a lot with Snapchat. So they're definitely trying out new ways to, I guess, engage the audience and just build that relationship. And essentially, really what it's about is, making sure that recall is there, during survey periods as well, of course.
Online stuff has really become an extension for radio brands, hasn't it?
It has, absolutely. And I think, with where radio is at and just media in general, I think radio is starting to see other media outlets, locally and internationally, really build strong digital businesses. And I think that's been at the forefront of the agenda for Southern Cross Stereo and Australian Radio Network, and obviously Nova Entertainment as well. So it's a big push in digital, in web, in social, and in mobile. And then you've got the commercial radio industry's radio app too, which is fantastic. It brings together all the radio stations into one app that you can stream. So there's so much happening in radio in the digital space, which is great.
Okay, our social scorecard for the week, radio's top social posts. Let's get into it. Who's at number one this week?
Well, Ben and Liam are at number one this week. Triple J's obviously incoming breakfast show. They put out a great video, which is an animated version of text they've received via the J's text line. And it's really just to showcase some of the really funny stuff that's coming through from their listeners across the text line on social media. Brilliant video, really funny. It's had 370,000 plus views already on Ben and Liam's Facebook page. So that was definitely number one this week.
I've got some audio here. Let's have a quick listen.
Just emptied me colon while cranking the tunes. Thanks, guys. JJJ is the best. I'm a Cub Scout leader and the kids keep trying to get me to dab. Send help! I just had 2 litre of liquid and I'm still thirsty. Me mate stapled his foreskin together after a footy game and a few too many beers. It was legendary. Thanks, my office chair now needs to be re-gassed because I've been bouncing so hard. Hi, can I please have a Splendid ticket? I just really want one, but I'm too poor. I can even pay you back, but it's the week before my birthday, so it'd be a nice present.
That audio thanks to the ABC. OK, number 2.
Today FM's Ash London Live, which of course is across the Hit Network of an evening. She did a great live Q&A interview with Martin Garrix, who's in the country, which is, hasn't had a huge reach. It's had about 20,000 views, I think, as of today, and a good number of, reactions and a few shares and over 100 comments. But after the on-air interview was finished, they just kept it going on Facebook Live, and that's where it really got interesting. So it really was an extension of what went on air, but online. So that was a great piece of content, and it was posted on Ash's Facebook page.
Those Q&A type things I see sort of work really well, and that sort of just general behind-the-scenes stuff that you don't hear on air that you will get through a Facebook Live or something like that.
Definitely, and I think that's what listeners want. They really want to get up close and personal with the talent that they've come to know and love on air, and they want to know what goes on behind the scenes. It's that whole world of celebrity and mystery and all of that sort of stuff goes on, obviously. So people love to peek, I guess, inside the studio and just behind the scenes and see how it comes together and get access to stuff that they wouldn't normally do in a terrestrial kind of fashion, I guess.
And number 3 this week?
This is great. This was from Kyle and Jackie O on KISS 106.5 in Sydney. It's a video called Make It Rain. And essentially what they did was get all these helicopter and rain cash on fans. It was absolutely brilliant. Kind of a hi-fi video. It was really, really well shot, and has obviously been posted across all their different channels. And that was number 3 this week. I
know one thing I noticed with ARN when they do video, it really does look schmick.
They do video very, very well. They've probably got some of the stronger number of resources in terms of video, and they have a very different approach to SCA and Nova. I think they've all taken a different laneway in terms of how they execute video, which is a good thing. And of course there's crossover. But the great thing is we're not seeing the same kind of stuff from all of them.
Jake, good to talk Radio Social, and we'll catch you next week.
Thanks, Chris.
You can check out the social scorecard and videos at radiotoday.com.au.
The World in Social, thanks to Social News Desk, powering social media for over 1,500 newsrooms on 5 continents. Find out more at socialnewsdesk.com.
My next guest has been heard on Sydney radio for 3 decades. He's worked at top-rating radio stations 2WS, Today FM, WSFM, and now calls Smooth 95.3 FM home. Glenn Daniel, welcome to The World in Social.
Thank you, Chris. Good to be here.
Now tell us, how did it all start, your news career? What inspired you to want to work in newsrooms?
I've got 2 older brothers, Chris, and we ended up, while we were growing up as teenagers, we used to muck around at home playing radio stations, and my eldest brother, Terry, was pretty cluey with electronics and whatever. He managed to rig up a little bit of a panel, and we had a bit of a mock radio studio at home. And the boys, my 2 brothers, wanted to be DJs. I always wanted to do news. So here I was as sort of a 12 or 13-year-old doing the news for their radio shows that we used to record on cassette and give to relos. I mean, if they didn't like them, they were too polite to say so. But it was that sort of start, and we were always fascinated with, listening to 2SM and 2UW and so on in the 70s. And my 2 brothers ended up in radio as announcers, and I went and did a uni degree after school and got a cadetship at 2WS. And for the last 35 years I've been doing the news thing, so it's been great.
Early inspirations for you, I imagine, probably watching the likes of Brian Henderson and some of those earlier legends on the TV and listening to them on radio?
Yeah, very much so. And guys like Steve Liebman, who was very big on 2SM before he went to television with Channel 9. Brian White was there in that amazing 2SM newsroom of the late 70s as well. And then at 2WS, you worked with some pretty good presenters and reporters, guys like Steve Blander and Steve Raymond and a reporter called Greg Henricks, who was probably the best on-the-road reporter I'd ever worked with. And one of those guys that just, whatever story it was, he had a way of capturing it. So for a listener that wasn't there, they knew exactly what was going on. And I learned a lot about writing from those guys because they could take something very complex and say it in 30 seconds.
Now, looking back at those early days, did you ever think that you'd still be doing it all this time later?
I probably didn't. The honest answer is I probably didn't look that far ahead. There were a couple of opportunities in my late 20s and early 30s to go to TV, and I didn't go. And people say, why? And I said, well, I actually really love radio. So I knew there was something about radio that meant I would stay for a little while. Whether I'd be doing it for 35 years, I didn't know. But it's been one of those careers that sort of gets in your blood a little bit, and I just enjoy the adrenaline of each day. Even though the workday is basically the same every day, and I've worked most of my career in breakfast, it's the same routine every day, but the content, the issues, the people you're going to have on the end of your telephone line or in front of your face on a microphone are different every day. And it's a privilege to end up sometimes in places where you get to cover an event that everybody's talking about. So as it turns out, I didn't leave, and I'm still doing it now. Yeah.
You've been lucky with your career in that you've worked on some fairly big breakfast shows in Sydney, Today FM, WSFM, Jonesy and Amanda, and now Smooth FM, enjoying success both in Sydney and Melbourne. What do you think's been the highlight for you? Which show have you enjoyed working on the most, if you want to share that information with us?
Yeah, that's a good question, Chris. Working with Wendy Harmer and the morning crew at Today FM was good, but for me, the standout has been Jonesy and Amanda, and particularly I look back over 35 years and I think Amanda Keller is definitely the best talent I've ever worked with in radio. And I say that because she was always prepared when she came to work. She knew what she was going to do, and she is super smart. She's super quick too, and we always found it was never a game of one-upmanship, but if you had a good line, Amanda had a better one straight back at you. And I think that's been the key to her entertainment success in radio and television. But she's been the absolute standout for me. Hans Torv and Kaylee Harris worked for 10 years on 2WS and WSFM. Again, all really good breakfast shows, but definitely the standout for me would be Jonesy and Amanda. Yeah.
Over the years, you've seen some pretty big news stories and covered some pretty big news stories. I guess, we could probably say, September 11 would be the biggest of the last decade or so. What other stories come to mind?
It's interesting, Chris. I'm in the process now of actually writing a book about the last 35, 40 years, and I actually set myself that challenge, and I thought, could I name the top 10 stories of my time in radio? And I gave it a crack, and definitely 9/11 is number one. For me, I had the Port Arthur massacre in Tasmania as number two. The death of Princess Diana was there as well. Likewise, along that, Cathy Freeman winning the 400 metres at the Sydney Olympic Games. And there were some other stories, things like the explosion of the Space Shuttle Challenger and Australia 2 winning the America's Cup. Also the Indian Ocean tsunami in there as well, along with the Thredbo landslide and the story about Stuart Diver. And probably more recently, I suppose, whatever you feel about it, there's no doubt that Donald Trump and the campaign and the US presidency has dominated so much of our media consumption in the last couple of years that it would probably have to rank up there as well.
It's been pretty bizarre, the whole US election and the Donald Trump thing, hasn't it?
It's just been crazy. And I happened to spend a month in the United States last year. I was over there covering the US Open tennis and then had a couple of weeks leave after that. And to be in the States for a month, 2 months before the election, it was interesting that most people would sheepishly look at you and say, so, what do you think about our election? And they were embarrassed to talk about it. And much of my time was spent in that northeast of the US, which is pretty much Democrat territory. And my sense was, even then, I thought, I think Trump's going to win this, because they would openly say they don't like the man, he's a lunatic, we're not going to vote for him. But they wouldn't endorse Hillary either. This were the Democratic supporters, and I thought, ooh, you're in trouble here when you don't even like your own candidate, and great areas of the Midwest are going to vote for Trump. And that's the way it played out. And while there was a little bit of surprise in it, there probably wasn't at all, was there, when the result came out in November?
He certainly sort of seemed to tap into social media quite a bit during that election campaign. Do you think that helped with him?
I don't think it harmed him, put it that way. I think the test is now that he's not a candidate or the president-elect. He's actually the president of the United States. And I, like many others, I think, have reservations about the president of the United States tweeting at 3 o'clock in the morning and saying things that we then spend days trying to follow up while his coterie of people around him go, oh, no, he didn't mean that. You know, it was just a tweet at 3 o'clock in the morning. So I think in many ways, while Trump has got his issues with certain sections of the media and fake news, the reality is he's actually feeding that problem by, the sort of stuff he's tweeting in the early hours of the morning.
In terms of technological advances, we've seen a lot of changes in news gathering over the years and the way it's reported. How do you think social media has played a role in that news gathering? Has it been a positive thing or a negative thing, do you think?
Look, I think it's been a positive thing, although it was probably a confusing thing for radio newsrooms about 10 years ago when things started to pick up with the various social platforms that were around. And what it meant was there was a significant change in the way people used radio. Radio had a tradition of breaking news early in the morning, and that was the first place people would go. They might see a newspaper later on, see a TV news bulletin that night, and that was the routine of their acquaintance with the media. Now, as we know, people wake up in the morning, first thing they do is open their phone and they check their various websites. So by the time they get to radio, they've heard the stuff or seen the stuff or read it, and our role becomes filling the story out a bit more than actually breaking the story. I think the other significant change has been for reporters, that they're not only reporting for radio with voice reports and audio grabs and so on, they're now maybe filing a television piece as well, and certainly filing material for social media as well. So it's complicated the role on the road. And, there are still some industrial issues there that effectively reporters are being paid the same money, but they're probably being, feeding 3 outlets rather than one.
There has been some questions raised about, we see sort of breaking news come in on Twitter and things like that. Do you think this thirst to be first with things has sometimes, got in the way of the fact-checking and checking things before we go to air with a story?
I think you're right. We've cut corners. There's no doubt about that. And I think the whole 24/7 cycle thing, as I say, there used to be set times when certain media would do certain things. Now it just goes all day, and there is that rush and that haste. We're definitely not checking as well as we used to, and things are going to air or being placed on websites where thorough checking hasn't been done. Before the digital age, you would still obviously have news wire feeds from AAP and Reuters and other resources, but the checking had been done at that end. You really probably could pick up and rip and read with those, but I actually caution our journos in our newsroom, just take that 30 seconds of care before you rip and read, if that's the right word, something off a website or a tweet, because simply the checking hasn't been done.
I think probably with that it also comes down to resources. We're seeing, we've gone from radio newsrooms in particular, where you've got 10 people working in a newsroom, back in the early days, to now there's sort of one person on their own, maybe not just doing one market, but possibly, 2, 3 markets at a time. That's
right. And I think the fact that it's been demonstrated technically that it can be done, often the decision makers in radio organisations particularly don't get what's required to actually put the content together before you go and record the bulletin. And as you said, Chris, there's people feeding 2, maybe even 3 markets, and when you work out that they've got to actually research, write, edit, compile those bulletins before they go in and read 3 bulletins in a row, what gets compromised is the research and the checking, and they'll still record those bulletins and stories will be missed. I think the other thing in terms of radio is what we've lost is the time to actually make those phone calls to people to do those interviews, and also get out on the road and stick a microphone in front of the news talent. So you become more reliant on radio in taking audio from television partners or from other partners online, because you just simply don't have the resources to be there.
With the explosion of digital and online content, there was talk 5 years, 10 years back that perhaps we'd see the death of newspapers. Do you think that there will ever come a time where we don't pick up a newspaper? Or do you think that, like radio, they'll continue to evolve and there'll always be a need for newspapers?
It's interesting, Chris. As something of a dinosaur, and the majority of the journalists in the newsroom that I currently work in are probably in their early to mid-20s. And I must admit, I'm first in the building of a Monday morning, and I get out of the lift, and one of the things that I always have a smile on my face is I walk into reception at the radio station, and Saturday and Sunday's papers are all sitting there nicely bound up with a rubber band, and the piece of paper from the newspaper companies haven't even been touched. So our young journos working on Saturday and Sunday don't even touch them at all. The first thing they'll open is their tweet deck, and away they go. So I must admit, I still love getting in early for a breakfast shift and reading the papers. Newspapers are still breaking stories, less than they used to. But I think the reality is, and I know, there's a lot of rumours and a lot of talk about Fairfax moving away from Monday to Friday editions, and it may well be that, the Sydney Morning Herald and The Age only appear as a Saturday paper in hard form and on your tablet from Monday to Friday. So I think we're definitely heading to that direction. It's probably going to be closer than we think before we just don't see papers around anymore, or maybe weekends only when people have got time to sit back and have a coffee and brunch and, thumb through the newspapers.
I've worked with some breakfast teams over the years who go into meltdown if they don't have their morning paper. And I used to say to them, it's all online, guys. Just check online.
That's true. And it's interesting, in the Sydney market, for instance, there's no doubt the Fairfax papers, if you read it, they're getting thinner. And a lot of it is what radio did yesterday afternoon. Interestingly, the Murdoch Telegraph in Sydney is still breaking stories. So what I used to see 35 years ago of a front page Telegraph story being the lead story in the 6 p.m. TV news bulletin still happens. And I think in 2017, that's probably surprising, actually. But definitely, I think they'll go on for a little bit yet, but there's no doubt digital is where it's going to be broken. Digital is where things are going to happen first, and it changes radio's role, although I must admit I'm very confident about the future of radio. It's been written off a number of times. Revenue has gone up in the last few years. Listening numbers have gone up. And while there's a concern about probably the younger generation, the 10 through 25, maybe even 30, are finding alternatives to listen to things, I still think radio's pretty resilient and got a pretty good future.
And that's all for this edition of The World in Social. You can keep up to date online at theworldinsocial.com. Like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter for the latest social media news. I'm Chris Rieger. Join me next week as we explore the world in social media thanks to Social News Desk, powering social media for over 1,500 newsrooms on 5 continents. You can find out more at socialnewsdesk.com.